Hello, welcome to Everything Distributed. Today we are going to talk about SQL injection, and then the content is based on Kevin's book and Cloudflare web page. They explain that what is SQL injection. So what's SQL? It's a domain-specific language. It's mainly used for data management in all kind of database, and it's very useful for handling the case when data is structured. And in the content for this talk, we only need to think about the SQL, and then what the data looks like is a table. And then you can use some SQL command to query the data. And if you are interested in learning more detail about SQL, you can look at this YouTube, which gives you a very high level understanding of a SQL language. And what's SQL injection? Sometimes we call it SQLI. Then it's type of code injection attack such that the user or attacker can retrieve data from the SQL database, even if that he or she is not authorized, because that the way the server or the design is not good enough so that the user can actually inserting some malicious or specialized SQL statements. And now let's look at usually how the modern website look like. It's that you have web page such that the user can request, and the web page has two components. One is the server that's hosting the website, and then the server will also interact with some database such that the database stores some useful information. So one common way of interacting with this website is that the user sends a HTTP request, and then the server will take the user input and generate some SQL request, get some result, and return it back to the user. However, if the user is malicious and if the website is not well designed, there could be some security breach and such that the malicious attacker can inject certain malicious SQL requests such that this is actually malicious, and then the result can contain some of the sensitive information such that the attacker can gain some unauthorized data or unauthorized access to the database. So now let's look at some examples from Kevin's book. So first, let's check a very simple example for HTML, how the website is built. So usually when you log into something that you need to have your password, and then this is based on PHP, so that you have a form to ask for user input. So here we have an employee ID such that, and then you need to enter the password, and then you have a button here, submit, to send your information to the server. So the idea is that, okay, I have an input field here, which is employee ID, another input field here is a password, and then this is the button. So that's the form that we can interact with the server. So once you click the submit button, then the browser will automatically generate this type of URL, such that YY is your employee ID and ZZ is your password. So if we back to the information flow that we saw before, is HTTP request is embedded in this kind of query. Now let's look at how the server code uses this kind of information to create the SQL request. So the idea is very simple. Here we wrote a PHP script. So first I get EID, which is this part YY here, and then I get a PW, which is the second part here, and then echo command simply just print out on screen. And if we want to interact with our database at the server side, we can generate the SQL command based on the user input. So here select, meaning that I want to get the field of the employee name and employee salary, and then the social security number. And then here employee is the table I mentioned. So basically it's a table contains all the information about all the employee at a certain company. And then EID This one is the user input, and PW also is the user input where we got it from the URL or the HTTP request that user generated after clicking the submit button. However, if we write this very intuitive solution, then there will be a SQL injection vulnerability. If the attacker is the user is malicious, he or she can get unauthorized access to the database. So what are some of the consequences? Is that unauthorized user or malicious user can gain some privilege that you don't want them to have, or like can even temper the existing data in database or retrieve like sensitive data. Now let's look at some real world analogy by Cloudflare. So assuming that Bob is on trial and then he's entering a courtroom, so that he will need to fill out some forms, like fill in his name. And then Bob will just write his name as that Bob is free to go. And then that's the full name, like Bob decide to enter into the entry of the form. And what happens next is that the judge will call out Bob because that is going to judge his case. And then he or she will read out loud, say that now I'm calling Bob is free to go. Then because the judge already called it, then Bob actually is free to go. So this is kind of like unintended input from the user. And then for SQL injection, the intuition is exactly the same. Okay. And basically that when the server side takes unexpected data, meaning that the user can try to inject malicious SQL command from the attacker, then there will be some security breach. So the example is that here EID and PW, those are user generated data, right? They could be malicious. So now let's back to this information flow again. Then we will want to see how the user can manipulate this HTTP request such that the SQL request actually is malicious. So simple attack, that's our form we have. Then the user can simply type EID as XXX and prompt and then pound sign. Okay, so what it does is that EID field will take this thing. Then the generated SQL command becomes this thing, XXX prime and then pound sign. And then in SQL, this symbol actually denotes the start of a comment. So everything after this will not be read by the SQL database. So this is a security breach because an attacker can actually get this XXX data without even knowing the password, because that when the database processing this command, it checks the symbol, then everything afterwards will be thrown out. Now let's look at an even more powerful attack. Is that we use the same script, but the EID, the user malicious user, types a different thing, a prime or 1 equal to 1, and a pound sign. Then after this, everything will be like kind of ignored. Then what this means is that we have an OR kind of operator here, and 1 equal to 1 is always true. So that what this SQL command is doing is that the SQL will return everything inside the database, even if the A is not an employee, A is not in the table at all. Because anything, when the SQL, the database engine, try to process the entry, you will see that, okay, EID, it doesn't match, but there's all 1 equal to 1. So that everything actually that this where statement will be true. So the name, salary, and social security number will be returned. And obviously, this is something that we don't want. Okay. So you might wonder that, hey, why do I have 1 equal to 1 in the SQL command at all? And then here is a very good pointer on Stack Overflow. So basically that there's a way to check the or keep adding condition we found needing to check that if it's actually the first one, and then you can read that more detail in like this answer. Okay, and then Kevin's book actually include many other more attacks, like the client URL attack, and then how you can use the same idea to modify the database, and then multiple SQL statement, and then please check Kevin's book. So the fundamental cause of like this kind of SQL injection or like cross-site a script attack or even buffer overflow is that when we do in this processing, especially the PHP server script that you saw, is that we are mixing data and code together. However, the data entered by the user shouldn't be trusted. And then one very good principle to keep in mind is that user-generated data shouldn't be trusted. You always want to sanitize it. So this leads to like some technical solution. The first one is that you want to encode in your data. You want to filter in out something. For example, that you don't want to have like this quotation mark. You don't want to have the pound sign. And then you can use a PHP built-in method to do that. And then for the SQL, actually you can use a prepare statement so that you can send data and code separately. Then the database engine will not interpret them as the one SQL command. Okay. And then you might think that, okay, this attack looks very primitive, and then the solution seems simple. However, there are tons of SQL injection attack, like even some of them very recent one. And then I recommend you to check this website. It document like many of the different type of SQL injection attack. And then as you can see that even some of the big companies, SAP and Adobe, are susceptible of this kind of attack. Okay, so that's all I want to share today. That we talk about SQL injection and give some examples and then two solutions. Thank you.